The first time I saw him, I thought he was being friendly. He was standing at the edge of our road, just past the last streetlight, waving slowly. Not fast, not excited, just a long, slow wave, like he had all the time in the world. I waved back. I figured he was a neighbor I hadn't met yet. We had just moved to Harlow Creek 6 weeks before, and I was still learning people's faces. That was my first mistake. Harlow Creek is one of those towns that doesn't show up on most GPS systems. You have to know where you're going, or you'll drive right past the turnoff. Population 400, give or take. One gas station, one diner, one church with a broken bell that only rang on windy nights. The kind of place where everyone waves at everyone, where doors stay unlocked, where people leave vegetables on each other's porches without knocking. It felt safe. It felt like exactly what my wife Dana and I needed after 8 years in the city. We moved in October. The days got short fast. By 5 in the afternoon, the sky was already the color of an old bruise, purple and dark, and the fields around our house went completely black by 6. There were no streetlights past our driveway, just flat land, dead grass, and about 2 miles of nothing before you hit the next house. I worked from home. Dana drove 40 minutes to her job in town every morning, leaving at 7, getting back around 6:30. That left me alone in the house for most of the day. I didn't mind at first. I liked the quiet. I liked being able to hear things. Then I started hearing too much. The second time I saw the waving man was a week after the first. It was around 11 p.m. I had gone to the kitchen to get some water, and I looked out the window above the sink out of habit. Our kitchen window faces the road. There's a gap in the hedges where you can see straight down to the end of the driveway, maybe 60 feet away. He was standing right at that gap. Same slow wave, same stillness everywhere except that one arm moving back and forth. He was wearing dark clothing, and I couldn't make out his face from that distance, but I could see the shape of him clearly because there was a thin sliver of moon that night, and it caught him just right. I stood at the window for a long time. He didn't move except for the wave. I finally stepped back from the glass and went to wake Dana. By the time we both came back to the kitchen, he was gone. Dana thought it was probably someone walking home from the bar on Route 9, which was 2 miles away. People cut through fields sometimes, she said. Old habits in small towns. She wasn't worried. She went back to bed. I stayed up until 2 in the morning watching the window. Nobody came back. I told myself she was right. I told myself it was nothing, but I started paying attention to the road after that. During the day, I'd glance out the window every hour or so. At night, I found myself checking before I turned out the kitchen light. Just checking, just making sure the driveway gap was clear. It was clear. Every night for 2 weeks it was clear. I started to relax again. Then, one evening, Dana mentioned something at dinner. She said she seen a man standing at the end of our road when she drove home, standing in the ditch beside the mailbox, just off the shoulder. She said he waved at her as she turned into the driveway. Slow wave, she said, like he was saying goodbye. She laughed a little. She thought it was sweet. I didn't tell her what I was thinking. I asked her to describe him, and she said she hadn't gotten a good look. Dark clothes, tall, still. That night, I called our nearest neighbor, a man named Gerald, who lived about a quarter mile up the road. He was in his 70s, had lived in Harlow Creek his whole life. I described what we'd seen, and he went quiet on the phone for a moment. Then he asked me what time of night I usually saw him. I said late, 10, 11, sometimes later. He was quiet again. Then he said, "Don't wave back." I asked him what he meant. He said some things in a small town are better left alone. He said there used to be a man who walked the roads at night, years ago, before I was born. A man who had done something terrible and then disappeared before anyone could find him. He said sometimes people see someone waving out there and they wave back, and then the waving starts getting closer. I told him I had already waved back the first night. He said he was sorry to hear that. He said to keep your lights on and not to look directly at the gap in the hedges after dark. I thought he was being dramatic. I thought it was small-town superstition, the kind of story old men tell the newcomers. But I stopped waving. And for a while, the man didn't come closer. For a while. It was a Tuesday night in November when I noticed the wave had changed. He was standing at the gap in the hedges again, same as always, but this time the wave wasn't slow, It was faster, back and forth, like he was trying to get my attention urgently, like he needed help, and I almost opened the door. I had my hand on the knob. Something in my brain said maybe he's hurt, maybe he fell, maybe someone needs help out there in the dark. That pull was strong and real, and it scared me later what I thought about it. But I didn't open the door. I stood there with my hand on the knob, and I made myself look away from the window and walked upstairs, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and I breathed. In the morning, I went outside to check the gap in the hedges. There were footprints in the frost, not at the edge of the road, not at the gap. They were at the base of our kitchen window. He had been standing there while I was watching him from what I thought was 60 feet away. He had been standing inches from the glass, and I had been watching the spot at the road the whole time, never looking down, never thinking to check what was directly in front of me. I called Gerald again. He told me to board up the kitchen window. I told Dana the window was drafty. I put boards over it that afternoon. We sold the house in the spring. Dana never asked why I wouldn't look out windows at night. She must have noticed, but she never asked. Maybe she had started noticing things too and decided she would rather not put words to them. The new owners of our house are a young couple, no kids yet. They moved in last August. I've thought about calling them. I still haven't decided if I will.
I took the job because I needed the money. That's the honest reason. Miller's gas station sits at the crossroads of County Road 4 and Route 17, right on the edge of a town called Delwood. Delwood has maybe 600 people. The gas station is open 24 hours because it's the only one for 30 miles in any direction. Someone has to be there all night, and most people don't want that job. I did, or I thought I did. The pay was decent, the work was simple. I sat behind the counter from 10 at night until 6 in the morning, handled the occasional customer, restocked shelves, watched the small security monitor mounted above the register. That monitor showed 4 camera angles: pump area, parking lot, back stock room, and the road outside. I want to talk about that road camera. My first few weeks were quiet. A truck driver here, an insomniac there, sometimes a teenager buying chips and energy drinks. Mostly I read books and listened to the radio and watched the empty pumps under their flat white lights. Delwood shuts down hard at night. By midnight, the road outside was almost always completely empty. The camera on the road faced north, pointing up Route 17 toward the dark stretch of highway that ran through flat farmland for about 12 miles before hitting the next town. I started watching that camera more than the others, not because anything happened, because nothing happened. The road was always completely still. No headlights, no movement, no animals crossing. Just a gray rectangle of road going up into black. Something about the stillness bothered me in a way I couldn't explain. It looked less like an empty road and more like a road that had been deliberately emptied. The first strange night was a Wednesday in late February. I was sitting at the counter around 2 a.m. eating a sandwich, half watching the monitor. The road camera was doing what it always did. Nothing. Empty highway, pale yellow from the sodium light mounted on a pole at the edge of the lot. Then someone walked into frame. I put my sandwich down. It was a woman, or the shape of a woman. She was walking along the shoulder of the road, coming from the north, moving toward the station. That in itself wasn't alarming. People walked along Route 17 sometimes, even at night, even in winter. But something about the way she moved bothered me immediately. She wasn't walking normally. Her pace was too even, perfectly even, like a metronome. No variation, no slight change in stride that real people always have when they walk. Just this completely mechanical, perfectly timed movement. Step, step, step. I watched her on the monitor as she came closer. She was wearing light-colored clothing, not dressed for the cold. I turned up the monitor's contrast. I couldn't make out her face. She was looking down at the road, so all I saw was the top of her head. She stopped at the edge of the lot. She stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. I sat completely still behind my counter. If she came inside, I would have to deal with her. I told myself that. I rehearsed it. If she comes inside, you smile and ask if she needs help, and you keep the counter between you. That's all. She didn't come inside. After 10 minutes, she turned around. Same mechanical walk, heading back north. Perfectly even steps. I watched her on the camera until she reached the top of the frame and disappeared into the dark. I called my manager the next day and asked if that kind of thing was normal. He laughed and said Route 17 at night was a weird road and that sometimes people did strange things on it and not to worry about it. But the next Wednesday, she was back. Same time, same walk, same stop at the edge of the lot. Same 10 minutes of standing completely still, facing the building. I could feel her looking at the building, even though the camera showed her facing away. I don't know how to explain that. I just felt it, the way you feel someone staring at the back of your head. The third Wednesday, she stopped in a different spot, closer, right under the sodium light at the lot's edge. And she turned to face the building directly. I turned the monitor off. I know that was stupid. I know if something had happened, it would have been worse with no camera. But I couldn't look at her face on that screen. Something was wrong with it. Not in a way I can fully describe. The proportions were slightly off, the distances between her features. I only had 3 seconds of looking before I switched it off. I sat in the back stockroom until sunrise with the door locked. She wasn't in the lot when I came out. I checked. I quit that job the following Monday. I told my manager it was the hours. He nodded like he understood perfectly and didn't try to talk me out of it. I found out later that 2 other people had quit that same job in the past year. Both of them had worked the Wednesday night shift. Nobody at Miller's gas station works Wednesday nights anymore. They close at 10 on Wednesdays now and open again at 6 Thursday morning. I asked the current manager why, just casually, like I was curious about the hours. He said it was a staffing issue. He said it without looking up at the register. His hand, I noticed, was shaking slightly while he said it.
We were 6 friends. We rented a cabin on Lake Merritt for a long weekend in September. Cabin 7 was the last one on the row. It sat slightly farther from the others, separated by a dense stand of pine trees that blocked the view of the main office and the other cabins completely. The rental listing had called it private and secluded. It was both of those things. It was also something else that the listing didn't mention. We got there Friday afternoon and spent the evening doing what people do at lake cabins, cooking on the grill, sitting on the dock, talking and laughing too loud. The lake was beautiful. The trees were turning orange and red. It felt like exactly the kind of weekend you spend months looking forward to. The first thing I noticed was the fire pit. It was 20 feet from the cabin, a standard ring of stones, but the ashes in it were fresh. Not old gray ash, dark, recent ash, still slightly raised in the center where something had burned hot. Someone had had a fire there recently, probably within the last day or 2. I mentioned it to my friend Kyle, and he shrugged and said the cleaning crew probably used it. I let it go. Saturday was perfect. We swam, we kayaked, we made a huge dinner. Nobody went to bed before midnight. We were all in good moods. I share this because I want you to understand that what happened that night didn't happen to people who were afraid or anxious or looking for trouble. We were relaxed and happy and completely unprepared.
I woke up at 3 a.m. because of the sound. It was coming from outside, from the direction of the fire pit, a low crackling. I lay in bed for a moment thinking someone from our group had gotten up and started a fire, which seemed odd at 3 in the morning, but not impossible. Then I realized I could hear everyone else in the cabin. Kyle snoring in the room next to mine, 2 others talking quietly in the far room, someone moving in the bathroom. All 6 of us were inside. I got up slowly and went to the window that faced the fire pit. There was a fire burning, full, active fire, flames about 2 feet high, and sitting on one of the logs arranged around the fire pit was a man. He was just sitting there, perfectly still, facing the fire with his back to the cabin. He was wearing a heavy jacket, jeans, work boots. He looked ordinary from the back. He looked like someone who belonged there, but nobody belonged there at 3 in the morning. This was a private rental. We had paid for exclusive access to this cabin and its grounds. I stood at the window watching him for almost 3 minutes. He didn't move. He just sat there with his hands on his knees, looking at the fire he had built in our fire pit on our rented property in the middle of the night. I went and woke Kyle. He came to the window, looked out, and his face went very still. Kyle is former military. He doesn't spook easily. The fact that his face went still told me everything I needed to know about whether this was actually as strange as I thought. Kyle said we should call the police and not go outside. We called. They said they'd send someone. Rural county, they said. It could be 45 minutes. 45 minutes. We all got up. We didn't turn on any lights inside the cabin because Kyle said not to, said it would let the man see us moving around in there. We sat in the dark and we watched the window. The man sat by the fire for another 20 minutes. He never turned around. He never made another sound beyond the crackling fire. He just sat there with his back to us and his face to the fire, like he was waiting for something. Then he stood up. He stood slowly, stretched his arms above his head, like someone who had been sitting for a long time and was working out a stiff back. Completely casual, completely unhurried. Then he walked to the edge of the pines and stopped. He turned around. He looked at the cabin. He couldn't see us. I know he couldn't see us because we were in the dark and he was in firelight. But he looked at the cabin for a very long time, standing absolutely still at the tree line, and the fire he had built threw just enough light that I could see his face from the window. He was smiling. Not a small smile, a wide, full smile, the kind that looks like it takes effort to hold, like someone had told him to smile and he was doing it as well as he could. He stood there smiling at the dark cabin for maybe 2 minutes. Then he walked into the trees. The police arrived 22 minutes later. They searched the woods with flashlights for over an hour. They found the fire still burning. They found footprints leading into the trees. They did not find the man. One of the officers walked me back to the fire pit. He shone his flashlight on the log where the man had been sitting. Carved into the bark, deep and deliberate, were the words, Cabin 7. Just that, Cabin 7, like he was reminding himself where he was, or reminding us.
My grandmother lived on Birch Lane her whole life. She used to tell me about the town when she was young, how Colton used to be a place where people walked everywhere, where kids ran between yards without parents worrying, where summer nights meant everyone out on their porches until midnight. She told these stories with real warmth. She loved Colton. She died in the same house she was born in, which I always thought was either beautiful or sad, depending on how you looked at it. I inherited the house. I was 29, single, working remotely, and a free house is a free house. I moved in during July, planning to stay at least a year, maybe longer if I liked it. Birch Lane is a quiet street.
10 houses on each side, large yards, old maple and oak trees that make a canopy over the road so thick that in summer almost no direct sunlight reaches the pavement. It's beautiful in a dark, enclosed way, like driving through a tunnel made of leaves. The kids on the street played outside most evenings. There were maybe a dozen of them, ranging from about 5 to 12. They rode bikes, they played in yards, they chased each other through the pools of late afternoon light. Normal childhood things. I found it comforting at first, that sound of kids playing. It felt like the kind of street my grandmother had described. I noticed the one child about 2 weeks after I moved in. She was younger than the others, maybe 4, maybe 5, small, with dark hair cut bluntly at her jaw. She always wore the same thing, a white dress that was slightly too long for her, dragging at the hem when she walked. She didn't play with the other kids. She stood at the edge of things, at the edge of the yard, at the edge of the road, at the edge of the lamplight when evening came. She watched the other children play, but she never joined them. I thought she was shy. I thought she was new to the street, maybe, or just the quiet type. Kids can be that way. But then I started noticing something odd. The other kids never acknowledged her. They ran right past her, around her, through the spaces near her, and they never looked at her, never called to her, never included her or excluded her. They simply moved around her like she was a tree or a parked car, like she wasn't something that required acknowledgement. I watched this for several evenings from my porch. One night, I decided to ask my neighbor across the street, a woman named Pat, who had 3 kids of her own who played on the lane. I went over during the day, and I asked casually about the kids on the street, worked my way around to describing the little girl. Dark hair, white dress, young, maybe 4 or 5. Pat frowned. She said there weren't any kids that age on Birch Lane. The youngest was her son, who was 7. She knew every family on the street, and nobody had a child that young. I described the girl again more carefully, the white dress, the dark hair, the way she stood at the edge of things. Pat went very quiet. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she said that my grandmother had mentioned something similar once, years ago, a child at the edge of the yard, standing in the road at dusk. She'd mentioned it to Pat's mother, and Pat's mother had told her not to look at it directly. She said her mother had also told her that it only appears when a new person moves onto the street. Like it's checking, her mother had said, like it's deciding something. I went home. That evening, I sat inside and I did not go out to the porch. But the thing about old houses is the windows, lots of windows, facing lots of directions. And at about 9 that night, I walked past the window at the end of the upstairs hallway, the one that faces the side yard and the large oak tree at the property line. She was standing under the oak tree. She was looking up at the house, not at a specific window, at the whole house, the way you look at something when you're trying to decide whether to go in. I backed away from the window slowly. I went to my room and I closed the door. In the morning, she was gone. I called my cousin that week and asked her to come stay with me for a while. I didn't tell her why. I just said I was having trouble being alone in the house. The girl came back twice more while my cousin was visiting. Both times I saw her from an upstairs window. Both times she was looking at the house. Both times, when I looked away and then looked back, she was gone. My cousin never saw her. On the last night of my cousin's visit, I finally told her everything. She listened carefully and didn't laugh. She asked me one question. She asked if the girl ever looked directly at me. I thought about it. All the times I'd seen her, she had always been looking at the house in general, at the walls, the roof, the windows. But on that last night under the oak tree, when I had backed away slowly from the window, I had glanced back once. She had been looking directly at the upstairs hallway window, directly at the exact spot where I had been standing. I didn't answer my cousin's question. I didn't need to.